of the mouths of babes and infants. You have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the path of the sea. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
One of the questions that our kids asked was if any planets are mentioned in the Bible, and I didn't find any planets, but we have some constellations in Amos. It says, the one who made the Pleiades and Orion, and turns deep darkness into the morning, and darkens the day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea, and pours them out on the surface of the earth. The Lord is his name. And our gospel reading is from John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, the darkness did not overcome it. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As a side note, if anybody would like a spaceship in their house, let me know after worship. I'd be glad to hand it off to you. It's been sitting in my house. Now, as I've been traveling around and trying to meet with every member individually this year, if I haven't gotten to you yet, don't worry, I'm coming after you. One of the things I've heard is an interest on learning more about the connection between science and faith. Our kids and our adults have something in common, right? A curiosity to understand how science and faith are and maybe aren't compatible or in conflict with one another. According to a Pew Research poll, most Americans say that yes, science and religion are in conflict with one another. Though a lot fewer say that science conflicts. You attend religious services, the less likely you are to think that science and religion are in conflict. Now, Presbyterians, we've noted, love to worship God with our hearts and souls, but also we love worshiping God with our minds. Part of the reason why Presbyterian clergy have to spend a minimum of 19 years in school before we can become a pastor. Presbyterians have excelled in the sciences, as we saw with our time with children. And we trust scientists as experts in the work that they too have been called and gifted by God to do. Presbyterians trust scientists to offer valid explanations of the history of the universe, knowing that there is always more to learn. We trust scientists who overwhelmingly support evolutionary theory. In fact, at a General Assembly a few years ago, we made a statement that said, to reject scientific knowledge and understanding on these issues is a failure to fully employ God's gift of the human mind and to reject the will of our Creator. That's a strong language. So how do we fit what scientists tell us about the origins of the universe and our planet and the human race with the Bible and what we read in Genesis? Well, the answer in part is that we don't. We understand what science teaches us, such as the Big Bang and evolution, and what the Bible teaches us in Genesis as two very different stories. Stories that don't necessarily conflict, but instead serve different purposes. Stories that both offer legitimate, fundamental truths about us and our universe. Stories that may or may not fit together, but that's not really the point. But we know that there are different ways to tell stories and different purposes for stories. And the story we hear in Genesis, the two stories actually that Daniel read, right? We should be hearing it as once upon a time, instead of the Associated Press reported that. The ancient people were not telling these stories to convey scientific facts. If they were, we'd still have to make a decision as to which one of the two creation stories in Genesis is correct. They were not making scientific claims to be held up for all time. In fact, it's pretty crazy to think that people living in the modern world would think so, given that so much of what we have understood about science has changed incredibly in just the last 100 years. Why would we base our scientific understanding of the world and humankind on any book that is 2,500 years old? But, here's the big but that doesn't make a once upon a time or a in the beginning story any less true. This story answers different questions than how many actual days did it take for the universe to form and how old is the earth. This story offers us truth of a different kind that isn't any less than scientific truth. It's just different. These stories were told and passed down and finally written down, some say in the 6th or 7th century BCE, when a crisis came for the people whose stories these originally were. Exile in Babylon. Amongst a people who told different stories about the creation of the world and humankind, and who had different gods and different understanding of the divine role in the world and in the lives of humanity. The story that the Israelites told themselves into their world of upheaval was not for the purposes of scientific advancement. These stories found in Genesis were told in order to bring comfort and identity and a greater purpose. They told these stories to remind one another the world was not created through violent battle, as others around them believed, but by the very word of the divine, spoken as an artist beginning a new creation. And that God dwells in this whole creation, not just in a temple that had been destroyed. They told these stories to remind themselves that they are made in the very image of God. They were not created to be slaves or as playthings of the gods, but they were created to be the ones to watch over God's creation. They told these stories not to calculate the exact age of the earth, but to remind one another that God promised to love them, and that they had promised to love and obey God. These stories were just as true as any you'd find in a scientific textbook. These stories were true because it was these found in this book that sustained the Israelites in a strange land. So much so that they found an urgency to write their stories down. Their truth allowed life to be bearable, purposeful, even when everything else had fallen apart. If truth is truth, says Father Richard Rohr, then truth has to be truth everywhere. Truth is one. That might be a big thought for an early Sunday morning. Truth is one. Now, do the biblical stories and truths as we understand them connect to the scientific truths as we have come to believe? Yes, but I think in a way that expands both our scientific and religious understanding and allows us to further explore the depths of each. Not in a way that clamps down and boxes truth in, not in a way that denies God's gift of the mind or the spirit. Those Presbyterian scientists help show us the way. As do other people of other faiths. People like George Lemaitre, who was a Jesuit priest and a physics professor, who heard the truth from Scripture in the beginning, and who knew the truths of science, and with those truths helping him to imagine in bigger ways, was the first to develop what is now known as the Big Bang Theory. The idea that the universe developed from an extremely dense and hot state to singularity. Scientists have been probing this theory ever since, and now some think that perhaps before that singularity existed, another universe existed, that fell in on itself, and maybe before that another and another. An eternal state of being. John's gospel tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. The Word is the Logos, what the Greeks understood as the eternal Word, principle, reason, that which gives order to the universe, truth. Truth is one. That's John's claim as well. To pursue truth, whether a truth of faith or science or both, to pursue truth well, I think takes some very similar qualities. And these are things that we can develop in our lives of faith or for our scientific, reason-oriented minds. These are the qualities I think it takes to pursue truth well. Number one is curiosity. I love how many questions we got from the kids and how I'm hearing faith questions from you all as I go about this year. And I don't know about you, but the more I live, the more I find curiosity to be a top characteristic of a quality human being. Curiosity in oneself. What are our motivations and prejudices and truths that we hold? And more importantly, curiosity in things and people beyond ourselves. In developing our curiosity, we realize that we don't hold all the answers or all the truths, which leads to number two, humility. Scientists and theologians, too, in a way, develop hypotheses. This is a favorite word around my house, hypotheses. Initial guesses as to how the universe, or at least part of it, works. And then they test it. And the key to all this to moving forward is humility. A willingness to be proven wrong. A willingness to have your assumptions shatter. An absence of a playful and an imaginative curiosity and humility can literally destroy us. I worked with another community recently who was in this place. It was filled with person after person who was hurting, broken. The truth is that curiosity and humility are necessary for life together. We see this truth so evident in our common life together today and in our country. A lack of curiosity and humility definitely leads to poor community. And it certainly leads to a weak faith and weak scientific understanding. Number three, in a spirit of curiosity and humility, a commitment to the truth is important to both faith and science. A lifelong pursuit of the truth, all while knowing that there are different facets and angles and sides to that truth. A willingness to learn from one of those different angles, knowing that you'll never arrive, you'll never see or understand or know it all. Finally, number four, sharing that truth with others. Science and faith both stagnate when they're not part of a bigger conversation. We don't grow when we don't work on articulating the truths that we have learned into words and our actions. When we have come to know that God is love, but we haven't worked on loving others better. When science has told us overwhelmingly that humans are having a profound negative effect on our planet, we don't change our behavior. Curiosity, humility, a commitment to and sharing about the truth. Friends, come, let us worship and love God with our hearts, souls, minds, strength. Amen.